This panel is on coordination, and I think in the state of Utah, we've got a special sauce. We used to refer to it all the time, and I still refer to it as a special sauce. I'm going to have each of the panelists introduce themselves, but first I'm going to take the privilege of having the microphone in my hand and let you know that my name is Christina Oliver. I'm the Housing and Community Development Director in our division in the state. I've had the privilege and honor of working for or with all of these gentlemen, and they are extremely brilliant in their areas of expertise. So I want to turn it over first to Representative Whyte to introduce himself.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Christina, and good morning, everyone. Wonderful to be with you today. My name is Stephen Whyte. I have the privilege of serving in the Utah House of Representatives, and in that role, serving as co-chair of the Utah Commission on Housing Affordability. And so everybody that's joining Utah here, either online or in person outside of the state, welcome to Utah. Sometimes it's referred to kind of as the beehive state. There's a lot of good, exciting things happening that are buzzing around the state right now, but also some big challenges too, and housing being one of those. So we appreciate all of your great involvement and work. You know, we're honored to be able to have this gathering here and the work of the Governors Association, and where we can learn from each other and take good ideas back to those peoples that we serve as well. As we're talking about today, coordinating between local and state priorities, I've seen and observed over the last couple of years that some really good things can happen and some great things can happen during working through difficult conversations as we kind of focus on, I call them the 3 Ps. First is the principles, the second is process, and the third is policy. And so looking forward to joining this great panel of experts up here, being able to talk more about what we can do to coordinate even better going forward with all different levels of government and reducing barriers and burdens and increasing the access to homes. So thank you, Christina.
Thank you. My name is Ben McAdams. I've spent most of my career working in public service. So I would say, like Christine, I've had the opportunity to work with or get worked over by everyone else on this panel. So I served in the Utah State Senate. First, I guess I started my career working for Salt Lake City. Then I was served in the Utah State Senate. I then served as mayor of Salt Lake County, and then most recently served in the United States Congress. I left Congress in 2020 and created a center that focuses on the use of identifying underutilized government-owned real estate and how that real estate can be leveraged to create benefits for the community. So we call our organization Putting Assets to Work. And we've worked with about 15 cities from across the country, north, south, east, and west. We'll go in, it stems from some work that I did when I was mayor, where we went in and looked at the portfolio of commercially viable real estate owned by government. These are things like surface parking lots that are half full and transit oriented to things like a salt pile or a library that is built 50 years ago for one purpose and is now transit oriented and the neighborhood's densified, and how can we now leverage those government assets for better benefit. So what we found when I was mayor is we had in the Salt Lake Valley a government-owned commercially viable real estate portfolio valued at roughly $15 billion. We've now done this work with cities across the country like Atlanta, similar real estate portfolio in Atlanta. Today, Atlanta is doing 40 workforce housing projects built on government-owned real estate. And that when you bring low-cost or zero-cost land into the capital stack, it really is able to start that process of developing workforce housing. My work then focuses on coordinating government, private sector, government across from state, federal, city, county, and then even within government, coordinating a library system with the transportation system, with housing, to bring all these together to unlock opportunities for cities.
My name is Justin Lee. I'm the Deputy Director at the Utah League of Cities and Towns. You already heard from my Executive Director, Cameron Dill, earlier this morning. We're the problem. I knew Chris would agree with that part. We're the problem, according to a lot of things, cities, local government with a lot of things. So I'm gonna go on a little journey with me for a quick second here. How many of you seen the movie White Christmas? Anybody? Okay, a few people here. For those who haven't, it's a holiday movie. You've got a couple weeks. If you got a break, go watch it. It's great. It's a classic, okay? So I'm going to give a quick summary, and I promise this will make sense. But so, Bing Crosby, Danny Kaye played these guys, Bob and Phil, who are World War II veterans. They get together, they become a song and dance duo, become very famous and well known. 10 years later, they meet these sisters played by Vera Ellen and Rosemary Clooney, and things happen. They end up on a train to Vermont. Okay, so they're up in Vermont. They're there to find the snow, and these cute girls. And while they're there, they run into their old commanding general who is running this inn. And this inn is not doing well. He's running out of money. And so Bob and Phil get this great idea that they're going to call up their old company from World War II and bring them to the inn and surprise the general. And it's going to be a really nice moment. Now, the problem is the concierge of the hotel, Martha, is listening into the call when they're trying to figure this out. And she doesn't hear all of it. She just hears a part of the call. And so what she takes from that is Bob and Phil are going to try to buy the inn. They're going to try to take it over from the old man, from the general. And so she goes and tells Betty, who's falling in love with Bob, that Bob's a horrible person because he's going to come try to buy the inn. So Betty then makes an ill-informed decision to go to New York and become a nightclub singer. It all works out in the end. But so what is the point of any of that? One, that maybe more people should leave their jobs and go become nightclub singers. I don't know. But the point is, a lot of what we deal with at our level and as we collaborate together are these kind of phone call conversations where we get a piece of the story. A builder says, hey, this thing happened in a city, and then we run up to the legislature, and the legislature makes sometimes less informed decisions about what might be happening, or we could get to a policy that has unintended consequences. And so what we've done over the years, as we collaborate and we work together, is we've created both official programs such as the Commission on Housing Affordability, or we've created some unofficial official groups like the Land Use Task Force, where we sit down with all the folks from the cities, we sit down with the folks from Property Rights Coalition, with the developers, with the home builders, with the realtors, and we cut off that problem that they had in the inn where someone just heard part of the conversation, where we start having full conversations, which is one of the ways we get to policy that maybe nobody is 100% happy with, but we start getting more comfortable with and have made a lot of progress through the years going down that road. So I'll end it there.
Wow.
Yeah.
That was a long and winding road to that. I knew he was going to wrap it up with, we need to communicate better, and we do try to do that. My name's Chris Gamvroulas. I'm with Ivory Development. Who's not from Utah? Okay, so most everybody. Okay, so that helps me. So in my introduction, so my day job is I'm the president of Ivory Development. Ivory Development is the land acquisition, entitlement, and development construction arm of Ivory Homes. Ivory Homes is a local home builder in Utah. We've been the #1 home builder for 35 consecutive years. We build about 1,000 homes a year. We're currently operating in 8 different counties in Utah in 24 different jurisdictions. And so I've been with Ivory 31 years, and in that role, I've had a hand in developing about 600 subdivisions. It's about 20,000 lots. So when I sit down with Justin and folks, there's a level of credibility there when we say, gosh, there's a real problem in a city somewhere, because we see it across the board. We know where there's good policymakers versus bad policymakers, or good staff versus staff that want to frustrate the process. So in terms of public policy, I guess since you guys are talking about your public service chops, I started my career working in the state government in economic development, and at the time, the Utah economy was terrible. It was the late 80s. We were shedding about 25,000 people a year in out-migration at a time when the population was about 1.8 million people. Today it's 3.4. And when the population is 3.4 million people and 25,000 people move in, you feel it. Like there's this sense that there's this, can you imagine what it felt like in 1987 when 25,000 people left Utah? The economy was terrible. And so everything that I did in public policy and economic development was about facilitating development. It was about facilitating economic development. And so when I got into the private sector, and I realized that so many people were in local government that were there to frustrate development, housing development specifically. Local developers, local officials will say that they're trying to stop growth, or they're there to slow things down, and they don't mean that across the board. They mean in non-housing projects. And so one thing that to the credit of the League of Cities and Towns, for 20 years we have been meeting in what we call the off-season, outside of the legislative session, where we get together and we talk about how we can come up with some policies that would benefit housing in particular, and still respect the role of local governments, and try to balance those things. And we've passed 65 bills. And I say that both to brag a little bit, and also because it makes me sad. Because if we had passed 6 or 7 bills and things got better, then we wouldn't have had to come back for 20 years and say things are still pretty tough. And so we look for policy levers that we can pull where we can do that. And so I have a CEO. We're privately held. I don't answer to a board. I answer to a CEO. Ben knows him very well, who really engages in the local community. So I've got a lot of time to spend on public policy issues, and I think that's one of the reasons why they asked me to be here. But I think the Land Use Task Force is one of the real special sauce things that we do here.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you bringing up both the Commission on Housing Affordability and the Land Use Task Force. In my work, working at more of the bureaucratic level, and other folks in the audience are working on the same issues that I am, we have a tendency to find that folks will gather around a table and admire a problem. And it's great. We're going to continuously say housing's bad, what do we do? But we're not actually coming up with solutions, and that's frustration. So in the state of Utah, the coordination effort through the Land Use Task Force and the Commission on Housing Affordability is that we still do have that problem that we need to admire, but we need to start taking pieces out of that problem and trying to fix them. Hence the number of bills that we have passed, but there's still more work to do. So knowing that housing is an issue, I'm going to ask each of you to tell me what you think the single greatest barrier to housing development is in Utah as well as other Western states. Representative Whyte, let's start with you.
That's a good question. To whittle it down, I'd break it into 3 areas. One is supply and demand. We've got a big deficit. The second, zoning and land use. And the third, I'd say infrastructure.
I would echo a comment the governor made earlier today, where he said, I think the free market is capable of solving this problem. The market is not free. And so that can be regulation. I think we've got, finance, trade, supply chain, a lot of issues, but, we can focus on freeing the market. And certainly markets need guardrails. So making sure there are appropriate guardrails on the market, but freeing the market to do what the markets do.
I'm going to copy Representative Whyte a little bit. I think infrastructure is one of the biggest problems there. We've got, with all the growth we have infrastructure, we have to replace all the aging infrastructure that we have out there. It doesn't stay good for everybody knows that. And then as we're growing, we've got to replace, or we've got to build new infrastructure. I'll just point to one city, Saratoga Springs, a little south of here, one of the fastest growing cities around. In the last 11 years, they put in 520 miles of pipe between sewer, water, secondary. That's enough pipe to reach from here to Denver. And so we're doing that, we're growing more, there's so much infrastructure, and then how do we pay for that? That was talked about on the earlier panel today, but is it the current residents that are gonna pay for that through property? Is it our property taxes? Is it the people moving in that pay through it for, through a pit or some other thing? Is it the developers who pay for it? So who pays for the growth in the infrastructure? I think is the big issue.
Yeah, developers don't pay for it. Customers pay for it. Just break it all down. You can't raise taxes on corporations because they just pass it on. Corporations don't pay taxes. So businesses don't pay for that. So I would echo what Representative Whyte, I'd say it's, but I would put it in reverse. One is, it is local government. and it is the regulations, it's zoning regulations. And then two, it is about the workforce and getting enough people in the construction industry, particularly in residential construction, which is an industry of small businesses. And then, what was your third one? I can't remember.
Just the supply
Just the
demand.
supply demand.
efficiency.
Yeah, there's that's it, right now. That's one of the benefits that we're having. It's one of the assets that we have is that there is demand. There's just not enough supply. So I'll give you a couple statistics. There's, according to the league's numbers, there's about 120,000 entitled lots. 180,000. Okay. 75% of those, there's enough infrastructure to go build on them. We actually don't need to go build new sewer lift stations or water tanks. There's the infrastructure's there to support them. What delays us are the bureaucratic delays in processing the applications. When you get the entitled lots, and then it takes years in some cases to bring those lots to market. It's an artificial slowdown of the process. And we've done some things the last couple of years. We put some shot clocks on the number of engineering reviews that cities can do. There's still a little bit of gaming the system with that from some local governments, but we've seen some benefits from it as well. But the number one thing in terms of the 12 people that work on my team to get lots to market, it's not because they're going to zoning hearings, there's a bunch of NIMBYs. That's maybe 10% of their time. It's the 90% of the time is physically getting the lots to market, and that's where the biggest slowdown is in the private sector.
Well, I appreciate that. And all of these gentlemen have worked on what we call the moderate income housing plan in the state of Utah. And that was really instituted by this fine gentleman on my left, Mr. Gamvroulas, in 1996, I believe, was when that was
Worked on
pushed
that.
into the general plan requirements. It is an advisory document, the land use map that was incorporated in 5-6 years ago. Those requirements were strengthened as this housing crisis became more evident. 3 years ago, it became even more stringent. Now, there's a lot of local pushback. I know because I run the program, and so I get to hear a lot of very interesting stories. I think that it's really important to identify what the biggest bottlenecks are. Chris, you already started to alluding to some of the bottlenecks, but there are bottlenecks on the private sector as well, and I have Justin talk a little bit about that. What, in your perspective, are the barriers? What can we do? Because there's skill sets that are across the board. I know I call Mayor McAdams at one point. He'll talk a little bit about how he's been able to, with your company, bridge the gap between the skill sets in development and the folks like I used to be, the community development directors and the planners and the building inspectors, boots on the ground. So anyone want to kick that off? It's a fully loaded question, or I'll answer it.
I'll jump in with the niche that we've identified. So, we are looking more at urban infill where there's already great infrastructure in place. There's transit, there's, the stormwater, all of those systems are in place, and yet, shockingly, like massive amounts of government real estate that is just locked up. And so I have to ask myself, I used to teach law here at the University of Utah, and I would start my class, this was many careers ago, but start my class with a dumb joke. I would say there are two economists walking down the street, and one economist turns to the other and he says, "That's a $10 bill lying on the road up ahead." And the other one says, "You're an idiot. If there was $10 lying on the road up there, somebody would have picked it up already." So they walk on past, right? So I have to ask myself, why is all this government land just sitting everywhere underutilized? Is it really there? And yet I know that it's there. I drive around, you'll see it everywhere. And they're in prime locations. These are some of the best development opportunities. And why is it there? So I'll tell you a quick example of that we did working with the City of Atlanta. So City of Atlanta has a salt pile. It doesn't snow very often in Atlanta, but it does, and they need to have snow to de-ice their roads. 75 years ago, they put their salt on cheap land in an industrial part of the city next to an industrial rail corridor. So we're doing this work with them, and we look at this salt pile. That rail line is now a streetcar, and that neighborhood is the most expensive residential neighborhood in the city of Atlanta. It's the Beltline Trail and the Beltline neighborhood in Atlanta, be akin to like our Sugar House here in Salt Lake City, right? And they've got salt sitting there. And we said, you could move your salt probably buy land for $100,000 to put your salt on, and you've got land that's worth $10 million. If you took that $10 million asset and took it to an Ivory development and said, we've got land, we want 30% of the units to be 80% AMI, we can figure out how to finance this. And in fact, the city of Atlanta is figuring out how to finance that. But going back to that $10 bill, I would say what happens in the typical city is we find that salt pile and they say, that's a fantastic idea, we're going to do that. And they turn to their public works director and say, we want you to go and negotiate a public-private partnership with Ivory Development and relocate your salt. And the first thing that public works director says is, I like my salt where it is, it's worked for 75 years, and I don't know what the mayor's problem is. This land, maybe it's worth $10 million, but the mayor has a $3 billion budget. Why does he care about my $10 million piece of land? I'm just going to wait and see if he's still mayor here in 2 years, and we'll see then. So 2 years go by, and yeah, we're working on it. We're trying to get there. Mayor still is pushing, and so then the public works director says, all right, we're going to figure this out. So they start writing an RFP, and the council comes in and says, we want it to be climate positive, and somebody else says we want 80% of the units to be 30% AMI. Somebody else says we need civic space on the ground floor, and somebody else says 30% of the parcel should be open space and parks. And so they finally get an RFP out there, and Ivory Development looks at it and says, this doesn't work without a $20 million subsidy. That's great that they got free land, and so they don't even respond to the RFP. And government then says, see, our land, that there's not $10 lying on the ground up ahead. Somebody already picked it up. This is not going to work. And so that's what happens. And that's why, that's our theory of why all of this land is everywhere, is our systems are broken for fixing this. And so we are working with governments to innovate government systems, government procurement systems, the RFP process, to really figure out how to get this. And there are precedents in government. I'm not going to go into detail right now, but I can send you a concept paper if you're interested about how we are calling on governments to innovate their own internal procedures to get this parcel out for potential public-private partnership without relying on your public works director or your library director to take the lead.
Or me, when you were in office.
Yeah, and talented people. I'm the biggest defender of public servants, but we can't ask them to do what they don't know how to do. Public service is a career that is rife with risks. If that public works director gets it wrong, and they're not dealing with Ivory Development, but they're dealing with a nefarious developer, and they get it wrong, he loses his job. So why would that person ever do it, right?
Right. Justin, Chris?
Yeah, so you're saying that there's inefficiencies in local government. Let me disabuse you of this common term that people use all the time, is that best decisions are made at the local level. That is a lie. I don't believe that. And the next time you hear that, go, nope, it's not. It's some of the dumbest decisions are made at the local level because they're made with their neighbors sitting across from them. And it's people that come in and force them to do something that they branded to grow something to make their community better. And they're told that new homes are going to kill kids, that school overcrowding, what about the wildlife? I mean, don't you know that there used to be elk that walked across that? And so they make really, really bad decisions. The best decisions are where decision makers listen to the public comment and then they go debate it in a transparent way in the public. And we see it at every level of primarily of local government, where, I mean, it could be just a review engineer. And everybody else in the city is great, but this one review engineer, he's just tough. And then it tarnishes the whole operation. And that's the real problem, is that we've got this decision making that's so fragmented. I mean, there's 250 cities. There's maybe 80 of them where there's actually growth happening, where there's growth pressures, like in Salt Lake City or like along the Wasatch Front or in southern Utah. But there's not, I mean, there are housing problems in Blanding, but there's not growth issues there. They're not trying to deal with a Costco that's coming in and what that's going to mean, right? And so in those 80 communities, and we're building in 24 of them. You've got dozens of planners and engineers and planning commissioners and city council members, and you've got this really fragmented decision making, and not everybody's on the page at the same time. They're just not. And we see, Orem used to be a great place to do business from a housing development standpoint, and today it's not because because of one election and 3 new city council members, and it completely changed the dynamic of working in this city. And they're reflecting what they believe they were elected to do. I'm not saying that they're doing nefarious things. They believe that they were elected to do that, so they're trying to reflect on that. But part of the problem is that we do have this really diffused decision making.
Great. Justin, do you want to respond?
I do want to respond to that.
Is this going to be another?
No, it's not.
Should we break
I'm not
down
going to go into a movie.
Sisters,
it's fine.
Sisters, or
I
Bing
could.
Crosby?
I can go to a movie
Yeah.
if you want, but maybe I'll slip the movie.
Poltergeist.
But I
That's
think
where the land developer was the evil guy, remember?
That's right. I was
They
gonna say,
moved
that's a
the
perfect
headstones and
example.
left the bodies.
See, and local decision making missed it.
They missed it.
That was bad. Thanks. So a couple of things there. I think.
It's good use of underutilized government land, though.
Right?
This is a horrible new policy we're making. No, so I think a couple things there. One, I maybe in reverse order some of what you talked about there. We live in a place where we elect people.
Yep.
We elect people to do things, and you have to respond to the public, or else you may not get elected sometimes. And call it NIMBYism, call it cave people, call it whatever you want. If you're an elected official in a city and you approve the development, the whatever it is, and the people get mad, you may not be able to make decisions in the future because you're out of office. So there is a very real pressure for anyone that's elected when you're making those decisions. Is that efficient? No, it's really not, but that's the system we've got. And there's also good reasons for that. So it's a very real pressure. So yes, it is diffuse, but that's what we've got, and we've got to deal with that. Are all decisions made best at the local level? Also, nobody tell Cameron I said this. Also, probably not.
It's being filmed.
I know. So nobody show this to him. But so I used to work for the state actually. I worked for Spencer Cox for 7 years when he was lieutenant governor. And so there's a part of me that very much understands that you're at the state and you're trying to get something done and you're working with a local government and you're like, what is wrong with them? What is going on? And some of that is personalities, as you pointed out. Some of those are just the people that are there. Some of those are people in office. And some of it is this other very real problem of resources. We've talked about that a little bit today, but local administrative advisor program that started a couple years ago. You talk about 80 cities that have real growth going on. Of the 255 cities in Utah, only 80 of them really have any kind of full-time administrative staff. So only about 80 of them have a city manager. And some of them maybe have a city manager, but they haven't for very long. And so as we're starting to grow into places that really weren't seeing growth a few years ago, there are absolute growing pains there where, yeah, you may have an engineer, but guess what? They're a newer growing city and that engineer is maybe a little younger and is just getting his first job. Or the city manager is right out of their MPA and they're learning stuff on the ground as they're going. And so there are some very real pressures there that we may not always have the resources, we may not always have great resources. And on the flip side, as all levels of government know, if you are efficient and you do something for less, nobody says, why don't you hold on to that money and invest? They say, especially if you're at the state level, legislature loves doing this, you guys did something for less, great, your budget's cut next year. Not you did a great job, why don't you keep the budget and do something else? Your budget is cut because you did a good job. If you're at the local level, we make it hard to raise taxes. We make it hard to bond for things. And so there are all these very real issues that, yes, we may want to do this. And even if you have a city that is, the very best actor who wants to grow and develop in the smartest way possible, there are also all those problems, the hurdles they have to jump over to get there. So it's not an efficient system. But we need to acknowledge those things as we're dealing with them.
Well, thank you for that. And I'm going to put Representative Whyte on the spot here. You've heard many versions of these stories in the past. And how can the state go in and solve the problem? I'm saying this tongue in cheek, of
Yes.
course, because a lot of local municipalities, Justin, I can't believe you're still standing. I thought you'd fall over when I said that, but the budget, our budget constraints in state government, federal government, local government, there isn't enough money to throw at this problem as we admire it. And there are so many complex reasons why it's difficult to develop housing. As you hear all of this, what are your thoughts? And from a state's perspective, what are the efforts that you think we need to undertake?
That's good. Well, Justin a couple minutes ago mentioned a musical. Another one's come to mind. Have you even seen the movie, or the show Oklahoma? You know the song about the farmers and the ranchers can't be friends? Well, sometimes there's perceptions or maybe realities of cities to counties to state not being able to work together, or maybe it's even builders versus cities not being able to work together. And at the end of the Oklahoma, it showed how that literally farmers and ranchers can really work together and to be able to move things moving forward. I'll give you a couple of examples of how that's happening in the state of Utah right now. For those outside of Utah, just a couple of examples, and I'd love to be able to listen and learn from you of what you're doing in your areas as well. One is this Commission on Housing Affordability. It was started several years ago to be able to bring different individuals, organizations, people around a table right here, along with many others. So at that group, there's realtors to builders to public-private partnerships to private private, what do we call this?
Property Rights
Thank you, Private Property Rights Coalition. There's cities and counties, there's transportation. That commission meets May through November. This year, divided up into subgroups under specific areas we really needed to dig into. Those are how the problems are identified, potential solutions are there, talked about, moving forward with potential policy recommendations for the legislature. So that's something that happens every year, and by doing that, the state's been able to take care of some low-hanging fruit opportunities, but also dive into some really hard issues that we're kind of talking about right here. So that's one aspect. Another way that coordination between state and local areas happening is through Governor Cox. It started the Governor's Unified Economic Opportunity Commission. That is another state-level group that gets together, and around that table is the governor, the Speaker of the House, the President of the Senate, along with mayors, county commissioners. There's executive directors there from agriculture and food to natural resources to education to all the different aspects of the state, realizing that the housing issue can't just be solved as a silo in and of itself, because everything is connected with that. So looking at the Unified Economic Opportunity Commission, pulling people together, moving policy ideas that can help coordinate state and local. There's a third thing that's happening just this last year. A housing audit was taking place in the state by an independent legislative state auditor looking at housing statewide. They came back with observations and recommendations of what the state should do. They're completely independent and neutral as a new set of eyes on all of this. And so those recommendations are being looked at, for example, this year in the interim legislative committee called the Political Subdivisions Committee. That is comprised of senators and representatives, many other experts, all working on those recommendations from that housing audit, moving policy recommendations for this upcoming year as well. So there are different examples of how coordination is working and trying to work to really dig into some of these really hard and difficult issues. The thing that's impressed me is that while we have different views and perceptions, everyone is still at the table and everybody still stays at the table. And when someone says something, the person right next to them can say something completely contradictory, and it's received, it's listened to, it's talked about, and people still stay at the table through this in the long term and short term. And so those are some examples of how the coordination is taking place here, and we're looking at other things to do as well. So kind of a quick and long answer to your question.
Yeah, there's a lot of work that's done all year.
Yeah.
You spoke a little bit about the way that we're structured and there's civil discourse. I want to highlight that because in a lot of different working groups that I've been in, people get very agitated. The great thing about the professionals around the table, not only in the commission, but also the land use task force, is they're listening with empathy. They are open to trying to solve a problem, and a lot of these 65 bills that Chris spoke about are those concerted efforts to get to some sort of a solution, and not everybody wins. Sometimes people, or one side of the table wins more than the others. So I'm going to back up a little bit and talk about the role of state government. Governor Cox talked a little bit about this, but I wanted to open it up for the four of you to discuss. It's a delicate balance. Can I tell a story now, Justin?
Yeah.
And I work with the league all the time.
All the time.
In a former daily, in a former role that I had, I was I was a community development director, and there was a development of 6 homes going up on 1 acre. These are these were 5 years ago, $895,000 homes. And an elected official told me this person thought that it was the ghetto. We don't need these types of homes in our neighborhood. The lots are too small, their driveways aren't big enough, there isn't a large enough setback, the homes are too close together. And I was floored. That may be the reason why I ended up taking this role. But those are the types of things when we talk about local control, that the perception of the elected officials is sometimes so far off base, it's difficult to get developments moving in areas, especially where there's more affluent people. I will say this, I'm generalizing, and I can get in trouble for this later. But also those folks who have the time on their hands to show up at those public meetings and provide feedback against the innovation in housing that we're trying to push. So we've talked a little bit about that balance, but let's dig in. Let's really get to the nitty gritty. What is the balance of state override and local control? Justin's not allowed to start. I'm going to start with
I'll just
Ben.
jump in since I'm somewhat removed, so maybe I can speak objectively to this. It's been 4 years since I've been in elected office. I'm not going to be on a ballot anytime soon. So, no, I want to come back to this land use task force. I had a baptism by fire like every mayor does. You come in, you're like, I got legislation that's and I'm going to pass it. And they're like, wait, has it been through the process? Well, no, but we're going to pass. And one thing that I think Utah does well is this task force is, and I don't know, I haven't followed it in the last few years, but when I was mayor, you went through that process because people would say, if it's not going through that process, your bill's not going to pass. And so before we're hammering it out on the floors of the legislature with lobbyists and everybody hashing it out, the reason they've passed 65 bills is because they were 9 months consensus before that, and it hammered out so we didn't have haphazard legislation passing that had unintended consequences. It was a consensus-based process, and you learned that you went through that process and you engaged. And so when you say that people stayed at the table, you stayed at the table because you weren't going to pass a bill unless that process blessed it. And so it's really been a constructive tool that Utah's used, and I think Utah deserves some kudos for that.
Thank you. We started it in 2006, and it is a completely voluntary thing. We don't operate with a budget. There's a water task force that meets with the Department of Natural Resources. They have staff. We're just a bunch of people around the table, and it works both ways. The league brings concerns that they have, the design standards. There was a bill 4 or 5 years ago that prohibited cities from implementing design standards, colors, materials, and those kinds of things in their zoning code. So they could still negotiate those things in a development agreement, but they couldn't put it in their zoning code. And a few years later, what we realized was that there are local communities. We knew it. I mean, we didn't realize it, but we knew it at the time. But then Representative Paul Ray, it was all about housing affordability. And why are you making builders put porches on homes? This is an entitled subdivision. Why is the Planning Commission telling you what color to paint your door? And those were fair comments. But now we've got a city in Ivins in southern Utah that has, by and large, a pretty well-established aesthetic, colors, materials. It's not 100% one thing, thank goodness. But they're worried about someone coming in and building a big pink craftsman home, and that wouldn't. And so that's a legitimate concern that they've brought. And I think one of the reasons why our land use task force has worked is because we do care about the policy. And as I said before, I mean, I'm all about the property rights aspect of it. I know that there are some good regulations, right? Like I want the health department to go and check on restaurants. I want that. I think that's a good thing. I don't want the government to tell me what color my door should be. I think that's a bridge too far, but we've been at the table because we have sincerely respected the traditional role of local governments, while we've tried to make policies that would expedite housing development, and particularly in the last 4 or 5 years. But we've been at this since we started the Property Rights Coalition in 2006 and the Land Use Task Force. We really started in 2004. So we are almost 21 years into this collaborative, consensus-based approach. And it really is just a bunch of people that get together. And sometimes we buy lunch for each other, and sometimes we meet earlier. But it's a really unique thing. So,
going along that line of having people stay at the table and people coming together, I have found that as everyone focuses on principles as common building grounds, a lot can happen. And some of those principles are home ownership strengthens families and communities.
Yep.
Everyone can buy into that. It's that common ground. Another is we have to respect private property. Everybody needs to follow the rule of law. There's the principles of accountability and transparency and using data-driven decisions, consistency, predictability. So as we look at these issues and layer them on those principles, that keeps everybody working together and continuing to work together as we go through the process and then write the policies as well. So starting with good principles can really go through that process to get good policies at the end of the day.
I think you asked about the question, where's the balance? Where should things happen? I think it depends on the issue. I mean, transportation is not an issue that makes a lot of sense to take care of city by city. I mean, WFRC, and MAG and other regional planning, it makes so much more sense there. If we're like, I'm going to do a track sign, but in my city we're going to do a different track sign, and then figure out how that works. Like, that makes no sense. Going back to infrastructure, there's some large infrastructure things that really, you don't build a reservoir for a city. So there's some infrastructure things, other things that make sense. There are some standards that probably, we dealt with road widths a couple of years ago. Chris and his group came and said, hey, there are all kinds of different road width standards out there. We go city by city, and we have to figure out how to build a different road to their requirements. Is there a way we can standardize that? And we had a lot of back and forth for, really the whole year. We hashed through that one.
It was painful.
So many discussions on road width, and we landed in a place where we figured out a standard that works better for them and that works well for us. And so I think it's about the issues, and that's one of the reasons, Land Use Task Force, the CHA, the UOC, these groups matter. Because like I said, if not, we play the telephone game, going back to my thing, and we get these partial information analyses that lead us to different conclusions. And if we all get around the table with the right people, when you're watching these kind of movies, you just say, if you would just talk, we could cut 30 minutes out of this movie, and there would be no drama. But when we talk, we cut 30 minutes out of the movie later on that help us get to better consensus items.
Well, I'm a little disappointed that I can't go to Ivan's and build the pink craftsman home that I've been dreaming about, Chris.
You still can. We haven't.
Give it a few months.
We haven't amended the bill yet, so you're fine.
We are going to open it up for questions, but I just want to give you each 60 seconds to summarize what could be done, what's the strength in collaboration, what can other municipalities and states do to build this type of a structure within their own borders, because it is working well and it has continued to work well. And I believe that it'll become stronger as we develop a statewide housing strategy, not only through the legislature, but also through Governor Cox's office. So Can you take 60 seconds and just summarize? We'll start with you, Representative Whyte.
Yeah, you just referenced some work that Steve Waldrop is leading in the governor's office right now about creating literally a statewide housing plan. And that is approached right now through a really collaborative effort with people throughout the entire state, and a lot of hours being spent to that. That just speaks to the power of that team, statewide team working together. I recall the former governor of Utah used the word team as an acronym, that together everybody achieves more. And that is what we're seeing here, recognizing housing is probably the #1 issue in the state of Utah. We're concerned about it for our children and our youth, the upcoming generation, grandkids. But as we keep diving into these hard issues, specifically between state and local decision-making and the coordination. That team approach and that coordination, I think, is where we'll be able to really make a difference and solve the problem.
Thank you. Ben?
When I was mayor, or this has been probably a decade, we marshaled a big coalition to go to the legislature and ask for a historic level of funding to invest in affordable housing, and we were successful. And I remember going back to my staff and saying, okay, help me understand what this historic success means. And they pulled out the Kempsey Gardner number of, it's like 28,000 units we need to build to keep up with population growth. And they're like, this historic number will build 800 units. And I'm like, so what we did was made sure that for 1 year, the problem's gonna get worse a little bit more slowly. Yep, that's what we did. So, the problems are big. And it's not just in Utah, it's in every city in the West and many cities throughout the country, that this problem is growing faster, and we just aren't building homes at the rate that our households are growing. And so the problem's getting worse, not better, with all of our efforts. So again, I have a hyper focus on government real estate. There are billions of dollars of latent assets stuck under the mattress of government in metro areas across this country. That is not going to solve the problem either. But if you can bring 10% of the capital to a deal that is low risk and patient, government probably wants to get paid for those assets, but if government's willing to say, look, we've been sitting on this for 100 years, we're willing to sit on it for another 10 until the capital stack stabilizes and the project is throwing off cash flow, then we want to get paid. That's a piece of it. I think you couple that with some of the really innovative stuff that Utah's doing around finance, some interesting stuff at the federal level. The federal government's starting to think, we can't think of housing just as HUD, but transportation is part of our housing solutions, and healthcare is part of our housing solutions. We need to think about the problem just like real people think about it. They don't think, what's our family's housing policy, right? And then, okay, now what's our family's education policy? They think about, how do we raise our kids and assure a good quality of life for our family? And so thinking cross-sectoral is something that needs to happen. There's really interesting stuff coming out of the FTA and the DOT, thinking about transportation policy as a tool to move forward housing policy. So we just need to think three-dimensionally and leverage, we need to continue the conversations we're having, but leverage some of those assets that are just stuck under the mattress and waiting to be tapped.
I think I read an article this last week from Harvard Business Review that it's from 2018, it's not a new article, but it talked about how the phrases we use matter. If we talk about we're going into battle, then we suddenly have a battle mindset. And I think we still use those phrases sometimes. It comes up, we're going to go to battle, we're going to have a fight today. But in reality, a lot of what we're doing is we have a mindset of collaboration. If I'm going to do something and I know it's going to impact Chris, I'm going to call Chris and say, you're not going to like this, but let me tell you what I'm doing. Give the heads up. We talk to the governor's office all the time. I mean, Christina, Steve, Laura, we talk to everybody all the time, and it takes longer because we are all talking all the time. But at the end of the day, we're getting to better outcomes without as many scars as we'd get otherwise.
Yeah, I was just going to say the same thing that Justin said. I think it is about the communication, the collaboration. So, yeah.
Great. Well, I appreciate all of you being part of this panel, and I do want to open it up for questions from the audience. If there aren't any, then Justin is going to sing Sisters from the movie that he was referencing.
That is not an incentive. You should ask a question.
Thank you so much for this panel. Bailey Thompson with the National Association of Home Builders. We talked a lot about the great kind of unofficial group collaboration that has led to all this legislation. And I'm curious, you also talked about kind of how unique it is. And I'm wondering if you can offer any advice to other states that would try to replicate something like this. How do you begin to establish those relationships? How do you maintain that trust throughout this process, especially because it's been such a longstanding and successful collaboration?
You were there at the beginning.
I was. We started the land use task force. It was really led off by then Senator Greg Bell before he was the lieutenant governor. And it started off as an effort to recodify all the land use laws in Utah that had changed because of Supreme Court rulings or other things, and to modernize it. And it was all consensus based. And then the next year we went back to the same group and said, hey, we really want to keep talking because there's other things we didn't handle in this group. And they said, no, we just want to see how it works out. So then a bill got introduced, and it was like this massive zoning reform. and everybody hated it and heads exploded. And so then we thought, from our side, we were like, well, maybe the best way is not to, drop bombs on them. And they came back just really sincerely and said, maybe the best way is to not play defense during the 45-day session. And so then we said, we'll agree to meet, and these are the rules. As long as we don't violate these rules, we'll continue to meet. And so it's, I would just say, talk. I mean, look at what happened in the last few years in Arizona. Is anyone from here from Arizona? The last few years in Arizona, where are you from in Arizona? I don't want to. Phoenix. But do you work for the League of Cities and Towns? Oh, great. Okay, awesome.
You can say whatever you want.
Yeah, no, well, I mean, I was going to just say how the League of Arizona Cities and Towns basically fought every zoning reform for the last number of years. And
Battle's a good word.
And Governor Hobbs vetoed them, right? Up until this last year. And then the league sat and fought this last thing. And it wasn't until the end that they said, okay, we'll be neutral on it. And then it passed, but it probably would have been a much better bill. It would have been a better solution if they came to the table and said, we're not going to say no to everything all the time. And it takes both parties to be able to do that. And I think what she did was great, at the end of the day. And maybe the League of Arizona Cities and Towns is going to be at the table for future conversations. And I'd say, bring it on. Like, have the talk. Like, look at, like, we're all friends. His boss is my neighbor, lives in my neighborhood, brought his kids to my house to trick or treat. Like, we're actually friends. And that's a really unique thing. And
Phone numbers that I need to give.
yeah, I'm happy to talk to you. I'll come down for a fee because I'm a capitalist.
And there's nothing wrong with that.
So is Katie.
Well, I'd like to add one quick thing on what Chris said there is we both have members that are not happy with everything we
100%,
do.
absolutely.
We have cities who say, why did you fold on that? Why did you give on that? We should just blow this thing up, and we're fine that. And you have people who said,
Why it didn't go far enough?
it didn't go far enough, should have done more. And that's been built over there. So it's knowing that we're all going to get some kind of consensus, but also knowing we've agreed to these principles, these ideas, and we're going to have to go back to our own members and say, this is a better way. We have to sell that almost every year. This is a better way.
It is a better way.
I would just say, it isn't rocket science, right? So I came into this process after it was created, and I referenced that, I don't remember what the bill was, but we had some bill we wanted to get through. The League of Cities and Towns said, we like it, but it has to go through the Property Rights Coalition, right? Legislator, I don't remember, may have said, like, I don't like it, but if it's been through the Property Rights Coalition, I'm willing to consider it, or, in that process, it just takes, like, for me, it just took that experience of reinforcing the process that I then said, I'm going to make sure I go through that process every time. That process is critical. And just having key players reinforce the process, then the process is self-perpetuating. It doesn't require a government commission and tax dollars and that. It's just having key players saying, we're committed to this process. And that's really all it takes. Like I said, it's not rocket science. It's just agreeing, believing that this one-off might be super tempting to just kind of ram it through, but you agree in the process because everybody's going to be better protected through this process than going it alone.
And our bill language is done before the session starts.
Yeah, those bills, they're worked on 9 months, everybody working on them, so there's really no surprises.
I'm not saying they don't change during the time. Like, there's still, because there's no monopoly on good ideas. And so people come and that aren't involved in the process and say, I think that could be problematic or this would make it better. And so we still have substitute bills. It's not that doesn't happen.
The issue that I worked on, I don't remember the details, I was trying to figure it out, but I was the newly elected mayor. I'd been in office for 2 weeks when the session started, and we had something we wanted to get through. My point is going to be that the process can also accommodate. So they said it hasn't been through the process. It's really non-consequential. We think everybody will agree. But we're going to run through the process. They ran it through the process. We got an answer in 2 weeks. I passed my bill. But that meant the next time I had something big, I started 9 months before the session to prepare it. And so it wasn't such a rigid process that something minor, they said, come back next year. They didn't. They worked with it, and we got it through, but we made sure all the stakeholders were okay with it. Sorry to interrupt you.
Well, that's perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just laid on that, the principles, the process, and that policy piece of it. And talking, Justin just gave an example of that proactive approaching, if there's something maybe not in agreement or another idea. Justin said, hey, I've got this, I know you might not like it, but here it is, and let's talk about it. So that proactive discussion and talking.
Right, we have time for one question. Or two if they're quick.
It's probably if we're quick.
If we're quick, not them.
Yeah, I've been waiting for two panels to ask my question, so I don't know if this is going to be a quick question or a long one. So speaking as somebody who is a Utah native, and my wife and I, we are in a median or just above median income level, and knowing that we are priced out of Utah's housing supply. We don't have access to mortgage credit in Utah because we can't afford it. There was a question that was asked by Christina at the beginning or near the beginning of the panel that I don't feel was answered as a Utah native who is in this income level. And
you're
just
in
to
Wyoming now? Is that right, or no?
No, I'm in Utah.
You're in
Yeah, but I might have to move to Wyoming to get a house.
Come
which is
talk
not
to
a
me
problem.
after.
I love Wyoming, but
Come talk to me after.
We're
We're a home builder.
in Utah.
I'll sell you a home.
But in any event, just to give some background to my question, in 2017 to 2020, particularly after 2020, it was discussed earlier on, and the question was, what are some of the hurdles in the private sector that actually increase the inaccessibility to mortgage credit in Utah? And that question was not answered. So from 2017 to 2020, particularly after 2020, about 10,000 housing units, more or less, were purchased by private and corporate investment firms in Utah. And that number in 2023 was increased by about 25 to 30%. So the majority of Utah's mortgage credit is accessible to private equity firms and not residential buyers who are prospective buyers, first-time buyers. And as I look around myself in this room, and I might just have to be a firebrand, I think I might be the only person in Utah in this room who feels like they're the ones that are prevented from a house in Utah. So my question is, what do you feel we could do at an administrative level to prevent private interests from competing with home buyers in Utah in the marketplace? How can we make sure that private interest facilitates, not competes, for mortgage credit and equity stock?
Thank you for that question. That's more than a 60-second answer, so maybe I could just turn it over to Representative Whyte, and he can address a little bit of this topic.
It is. It's a big concern. It's being talked about this with the Commission on Housing Affordability this year for exactly that piece, and there's policy discussions and ideas that will move forward this upcoming legislative session about it. But it is. We're seeing that as an issue of institutional buyers coming in and buying out a whole neighborhood, or potentially could buy a neighborhood, new construction, and then turn those into rentals rather than opening them up for first-time home buyers to be able to get into them.
So I'm going to answer that from the private sector side, and there's nothing that the government can do to prohibit a private party from entering into a voluntary contract with another private party. And when the government does that and they have no interest in it, then they're interfering with a constitutional private property right. I'm the Property Rights Coalition guy, if you can't tell. Now, that being said, we've built a lot of homes. Our company has built a lot of homes in Park City and South Jordan and others that have had deed restrictions on them. And the reason that we've cooperated with that is because there was a public investment into it. The local community invested capital into that. And so we did do some deed restrictions. So had to go to a city employee or a school district employee. In Park City, the city actually selects the people and give preference to city employees. And these are single-family detached homes in Park City proper that are selling for $500,000 and $600,000, which is absolutely an impossibility if you're a fireman to be able to afford that. But the public invested in it, and so there's nothing that stops, our company from entering into an agreement to sell to BlackRock. We won't. We're a home builder, and we want to build for Utah families. We built 25,000 homes in the state of Utah. We're really proud of that. But there are times that we build a townhome community, and our leadership elects to keep it, and it becomes an investment. And what he's done is he's contributed those to his foundation. And And if a company wanted to come in, I mean, there's, I don't know, a couple hundred homes a year in Saratoga Springs. They're being built, BTR, built to rent. At the NAHB, if you go to the International Builder Show in Vegas in February, there'll be 10 programs at the International Builder Show on build for rent, how to do it. Like it is a business model. I don't think that BlackRock's coming in and buying individual homes in existing neighborhoods at scale. It's too hard to manage that. They would absolutely do a BTR in the Atlanta market or South Carolina, North Carolina. They're already doing it there. But in Texas, it's happening a lot. I don't think you're competing for mortgage capital against BlackRock. They just have cash. And I think you can get a mortgage. I don't think that's the problem. But I heard the conversation earlier about the short-term rentals. It's an issue in Park City. It's an issue in Washington County, down around St. George. It is a real issue. But it also is a business that people take advantage of. They just do, and it's mostly individuals. We're building about 50 of those a year in the St. George market. We're also building some primary residential in other locations where we're doing it. We have approval. We actually got it in a development agreement with the city of Washington to do short-term rentals in this, so we're doing it totally above board. Every single one of those is to an individual, or a family LLC or something like that. And so I think that I'm not saying that it's not happening, but primarily it's not because they're competing with you for the home and you're bidding against them, because they're building them and they're never selling them. They're just building them that way. And so I don't know that you can do it. I don't think the Utah legislature passes a bill that prohibits a private party from voluntarily entering into an agreement with another private party to sell their real estate. I don't think the Utah legislature ever does that.
Great. I'm going to wrap this up. Thank you, all of you, and thank you for your questions. I do want to just highlight a key takeaway from this particular panel. If it wasn't stated clearly enough, you should get the message that there's balance. So entering into these negotiations on these very difficult topics, including, local control, all of parking. I won't even get into parking. Parking's right now. It takes balanced characters, and we are fortunate in the state that we have some of the most balanced characters that I've seen across multiple spectrums getting together, tackling these problems in a respectful and empathetic manner that actually do move the pendulum, rather than the Arizona model of the League of Cities and Towns, unfortunately, battling everything. We all know what happens in those types of situations. Nothing moves forward, and no one wins. So with that, thank you.